If you are stuck on how to elevate your career and your everyday work leaves you feeling exhausted and disappointed, this podcast is for you. You're listening to Work Liberated, the intersection between personal transformation and career empowerment. Listen to industry experts who share valuable advice on dispelling burnout, anxiety, and stress in the workplace through life-changing and innovative strategies. Reconnect with your highest purpose, realign with your core values, and liberate your human spirit by unleashing your full potential in everything you do. Here's your host, Margaret Graziano.
Welcome to Work Liberated. Today's guest is Amadea Sanchez, who comes to us as a soon-to-be recent graduate with a master's in leadership from
Purdue in Indiana.
Awesome. And she's coming from the perspective of an emerging leader and also being an employee for the last 10 years in the financial services industry. So again, this podcast is about work liberated, finding and leading an organization where people can be fully self-expressed, experience agency, autonomy, freedom, empowerment, and do the kind of work they love doing. And so, Amadea, why did you decide to go back to school? You're certainly not old, but you're not 20. So why did you decide to go back to school after a decade and a half of being in the working world?
Well, hi, Maji. It's so good to be here with you. As you mentioned, I've been in the financial sector for about 15 years now. And, I've lived in Silicon Valley and Santa Cruz County, graduated with a master's in, will be graduating with a master's in organizational leadership. And it really, for me, it was just going through a lot of challenges that I couldn't really overcome. And I didn't know what I was doing wrong. I felt like I was a little marginalized. I felt like being in an industry that is so heavily, male, it's really kind of dominant in that way. I needed some help. And so I started looking at how can I have more of a voice with my leaders? How do I, when I kind of have instincts that something's wrong, how do I build my own empowerment? How do I get more knowledge in order to be able to, describe what I'm going through to my leaders? So
hold on a second. So what I'm hearing is that here you were, and you've been at the same company for a decade.
15 years. Yeah.
15 years in a producer role. So sales, so you're generating revenue, you're an individual contributor, and you felt like you didn't say being held back. You said you felt like you were not holding yourself back, but there was something in the way for you. And so you took it upon yourself to go back to school. So I want you just to look at that camera right there and share what the moment in time was that you kind of looked in the mirror and said, if this is to be, it's up to me, which is interesting because it's the last woman I interviewed for the podcast before is an executive and said the same thing to herself. So what was your moment that you said, I got to do something to help myself here?
It was during the pandemic. And I think a lot of people were feeling that they needed a change. I was feeling like I wanted to quit my job. I knew others were feeling lonely. There was a lack of, community, communication. It felt like we were all on an island, to be honest. And I wasn't getting further in my career the way that I wanted to. So I decided to enroll in a leadership program to take the next step, to decide how I wanted to have a future. Was this going to be the right step for me, or was I going to make a change? So I was always very passionate about leadership, working with business owners in this community. I'm so passionate about that. I see how hard, business owners work. My mom and dad were business owners. So my passion for making an impact was really strong. And I loved my job. I still do. But then I had the opportunity to go to school, and it immediately it was empowering, just making the commitment, because now I had some really great tools that I could use to use my voice.
So you took the initiative, you registered yourself. What did you learn about yourself? And so it's interesting because this podcast this episode sounds like it's going to be more around personal empowerment, personal responsibility, but maybe not. Maybe it'll go somewhere else. But what did you first learn? How were you holding yourself back?
Well, you don't know what you don't know. And I wasn't using my voice. So when I became empowered, when I enrolled, when I committed, people were immediately, there's there's a lot of different ways we can empower ourselves, and knowledge is one of them. So as soon as I did that, I noticed that people around me were respectful immediately. I noticed that I believed in myself and my own voice. I noticed that I started sharing my learnings and I saw changes around me.
So you just suddenly noticed that, like you were just more self-aware, or you were more definitive in your communication?
The tools that we were learning in the program were the building blocks of culture. And what I realized is that we had, and a lot of companies have a flat culture. And
What does that mean, flat culture?
so like you said, 78 in your book, 78% of employees post pandemic still want to make a change.
Yeah.
And it's because, again, in your book, 15% of leaders have the skills that we need to build a culture, right?
To really
So,
lead. Yeah.
to lead. So
Nobody's been training. They talk about training, but they don't offer it. And then people
Right.
have to be like you and go and get themselves a master's degree program in order to learn.
Right. So first I had to realize what was going on. I had experienced unconscious bias. I had experienced maybe others were being recognized and I wasn't. I was being told I was doing things too much, we have great leaders. It's not a unique problem. It's happening everywhere.
Wait, you got to back up. What do you mean you were told you were doing things too much?
Well,
Like you were too much?
Well, more like when others are recognized, like your male counterparts for doing something you've been doing
Yeah.
for 6 months to a year and never getting recognition, then asking why. And it's because you do it too much. So it's just little idiosyncrasies. And I think it's really based on the communication. Leaders don't necessarily understand how to motivate their employees, and they aren't really sure how to ask. And when I talk about a flat culture, it's more about, you might have a beautiful house on the water, but unless you have, the lights on, unless maybe you come in and you put a little music on, now you have people, you bring, like you can share best practices. So if you translate that to the workplace, flat just meant there was no connection. We weren't sharing best practices.
Yeah. Well, and also it sounds like you just said lack of connection and feeling like you're part of something.
Right.
Lack of affiliation.
Right.
It was just, you do your job, you come here, you get your job done, you make it through the day.
Right.
And is it still that way, or have you changed?
I think that as I have changed, definitely the experience has been transformational for me. And that just means I take accountability. There's so many different resources out there that now when I have a question about retention, when I have a question about psychological safety, when I have questions about toxic leader behaviors, we have great leaders out there. They just need the tools. So now I'm sharing what I've learned and I see people light up. I see people change. I was able to really have a collaborative partnership with my manager, where now I shared this and he was thirsty for the tools as well. So then taking his great leadership skills and turning it into something that benefited the whole team.
So your curiosity
yes,
made him get more curious and be
Yes.
more open. So everyone is throwing around this toxic leadership. What is, in your opinion, as a 15-year person with the same company, highly successful, what is toxic leadership? Because there's also toxic employee behavior.
Sure.
Which I'm sure you've seen. People come into a sales job and don't produce,
Yeah.
and they blame the company.
Yes. Well, I think one is dependent on the other.
Okay.
I think you can fully come to your job and have the best intentions, and your leader can have the best intentions. But then some of the things that happen on both sides can end up in a miscommunication and frustration and keeping that inside and then not knowing how to fix it, leading to retention issues.
So let's talk about toxic. Give me some examples without any names. What are some examples of toxic employee behavior, in your opinion, and then toxic management behavior, so that we're not just using the jargon and the communication?
What's an example of
Yeah. Real, because a lot of us talking cliches and just jargon, like business jargon, like thinking out of the box or something like that. And I think toxic has become a cliche.
Well, for example, if you set a meeting with your manager and you set 30 minutes aside and then your manager ends up taking an hour and a half, that's a sign of disrespect. And that,
Because the manager was late or because you went over because you talked too much?
well, because you're both not respecting that time,
Okay, good.
or one of you didn't. So I can be that way on my part, and so can the leader. So it's like we have to respect each other's boundaries, because
So
then
specific times.
that could end up really stressing out the leader or the employee. So you respect each other, and then you communicate. If someone makes a mistake, a lot of times people don't go back and have the conversation like, hey boss, I just wanted, when they say, what do you need? And that's my fault for not saying what I need. But it's also something that the leader can control, because you can build activities in to build trust with your employees and as a manager. So if there's something wrong, a lot of times I think it boils down to trust. If you built more trust, you could say now safely, right? There's that silence factor. Safely, you could say, hey boss, last week this was a little stressful. Or he could say, hey Madia, we have this or we have that needs to get done by this day or time. Can you help me?
Yeah, it sounds like it's safety, but even before safety is baseline trust. And even before baseline trust, it's communication. Like
communication.
If you're not going to be able to get something done, then respect is communicating proactively to the boss. I told you I'd get this done. I'm not going to be able to get it done. And then what the boss can do is build in proactive follow through.
Right.
Hey, how you doing on that project? Are we going to get it on time? But what it sounds like you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is it's a two-way of both people being 100% responsible for a healthy relationship.
Absolutely.
It's not just the boss and it's not just the person. So you learned about yourself that maybe you were not being as communicative, or that were you taking things personally? Or you said unconscious bias, and I didn't understand what you were unconsciously biased to.
Everyone is unconsciously biased. So I was unconscious that I'm not speaking of my unconscious bias. Well, because I really wasn't able to define the term before I went to school. I didn't really understand what it was about. And when I understood and can identify when unconscious bias was happening, I recognized it in myself. I recognized it in others.
So what is unconscious bias?
Well, for example, it's the way that we put people kind of in a quick box to be able to understand, if they're a threat, if, we kind of sum them up when we don't know what we don't know. So we might have a feeling about this person because there's fear or whatever our body does to help defend that. But we have to be aware of it so we can move past that feeling and really look at people for who they are and what they have to offer.
Yeah.
So it happens with women, it happens with minorities, it happens with everybody.
Yeah, it sounds like it happens in every area of life. There's a great book. They don't call it unconscious bias. It's called Leadership and Self-Deception. And it's about putting people in the box. So, Amadea is coming over for this interview and it's 15, it's quarter of, and she's not here. And I'm going, where is Amadea? Where is Amadea? So I haven't even given her a chance to be late. This didn't happen actually, but I was wondering, but I didn't go in and start texting. But the thought could have been, had you been a person who'd been late with me before, I would be like, is she going to be late? Am I going to be worried about it? So it's like something happens and maybe something doesn't even happen. She's just a woman, or she's just Latino, or she's Italian and talks a lot with her hands, or a man. And we have an already always preconceived notion, and we put them in the box and we don't ever give them a chance to get out of the box. And it's a great book, Leadership and Self-Deception. It was required reading for my leadership 1 year long immersion program, not that I led, that I took. So you had some unconscious bias about yourself at all? Was there anything anywhere?
Yeah, something that I did maybe was, I realized that in a position where I'm making sales calls, I was calling business owners and I'd see a husband and wife maybe, and I'd immediately speak, I'd ask for the husband. This is something I picked up on years ago, but that's an example of an unconscious bias.
It's conditioning.
Well, right. And then the woman might be the one who's actually running everything, which I've found to be true many times. So you have to realize it, check yourself, move forward and be better.
So you've uncovered your own unconscious bias. How though, when you uncovered a boss's, so this is really good for managing up, how would you tell a boss, because they're your authority figure. Hey, buddy, you got an unconscious bias and you're treating me differently because I'm a woman or I'm a Latina. How would you say that, or would you not even say it? Or what have you experienced with that, if you feel safe to say?
I did have that conversation and it was scary, but one of the things I told you that I got was that self-efficacy, right?
Mhm.
That confidence in myself, because now I felt like I had the keys and I had to share it. So what my intention was, once the communication opened up and both of myself and my leader, we began to trust each other. We realized that we were a dynamic duo. I mean, coaching up is just really sharing what you're learning. And then
Mhm.
he was so inspired that he'd take it and make it his own and be even better than my idea. And we all benefited. Our team kind of turned around like a
So be
180.
specific. What was the coaching up that you did with regard to unconscious bias? Just to
Yeah.
give maybe somebody in the audience that's listening or watching hope, because a lot of people, Amadea, like you, they think, well, should I leave? Or how can I fix this place? Or how can I be better so that we're better? And then all of us can be better together. Because what I've seen with the thousands of companies that I've worked with is often we quit the job and we think it's going to be different at the next place, but we still show up with the same behaviors. And so we have the same behaviors at every company and we think it's our bosses, but there's always a different boss who's a lot like the last boss.
Yeah, there's always a different boss, but I think face to face works well for me. So we had a visit and I took the opportunity to have a discussion about a way that I felt I was wounded or, hurt.
You really said that? Like, you hurt me?
Yeah. I think when in doubt, a heart to heart is a great way to go.
Okay, so there you are, you're with your boss and
Yeah.
you say something to the order of, when you did this, I got hurt.
Yeah, I said, when we had an instance where, I felt like he wasn't respecting me, then I had to say, I felt like this was unconscious.
Mm,
And,
you didn't do it on purpose.
we all have it, but here's where we could work on this. And response was, what do you mean by unconscious bias?
Mm.
And there's so much of that. I had a leader at another company. This isn't just unique to one company. This is everywhere. That's why everybody is really, wants to learn more about the leadership piece, because
Yeah.
it's so empowering. We're all ready for, the same kind of respect and the same kind of boundaries we have at home. We want that in the workplace.
Yes.
And
On both sides.
on both sides. And we have to take accountability and we have to share. We have to open up channels of communication, build that trust. And it was the work that I did to get me to being able to have that conversation and saying, it's microaggressions. Well, what's a microaggression? And then we talked about
How did he not get defensive? So there must have been something that you did or said that had him not get defensive, because it sounds like he was curious with you, but not defensive. Was he defensive?
No, because we had worked on building trust. I started telling him, hey, I'm feeling like a little lonely on the team.
Mm.
Do you mind if I call and check in on others? And then, yeah, he was all for that because I cared about myself. I cared about him. I cared about the team. I'd come back with feedback. I'd say, this person is usually jovial and she's saying she's depressed and she doesn't know why. And, can we have a Zoom happy hour? Can we have a morning coffee where we connect virtually?
Okay, so Amadea, excuse me, here's what I hear you did. You weren't just complaining, you were contributing.
Right.
You were offering solutions to the disengagement, disconnection challenge.
Right.
So it wasn't just like you were going there and saying, you have unconscious bias, you're not being fair to me. You were being vulnerable. You were talking about how you felt.
Right.
And you were talking about ideas of how to bring people together, which one of the 4 components of a healthy culture is people need to feel connected. People really need to feel on a human side that there is a connection on the team and that people care about each other.
Absolutely.
Good.
And we were having these team meetings, but people were afraid to contribute. You can't see each other's faces. It was just kind of on a phone call. And through my learnings, I had done this research about how people need to trust one another. And to do that, you have to do things like icebreakers or feel psychologically safe on camera. You got to get to know each other's skills. And then it becomes a more rich, less flat culture. Now you have friends, what they do, they own other businesses, they do something besides, working for that institution, and you feel fulfilled, you have connections, you want to come to work.
Yeah, the humanistic side.
Right.
So when you say flat, What you're really meaning is like superficial, like it's all just, let's just get some work done. And
Yeah.
what you want and what you're saying that you're contributing to is this, not just this humanistic connection and affiliation, but we're part of something and we're part of something together. So good. So we've talked about trust. We've talked about communication. We've talked about unconscious bias. We've talked about authenticity and courage and managing up, or you called it coaching up. We've talked about personal accountability and respect. What else would you say is important as a individual contributor wanting to take responsibility for your experience at work? So we've talked about personal responsibility. We've talked about respect. We've talked about coaching up. We've talked about trust, about building trust, rapport, and authenticity. If I didn't say that already, is there anything else that's really made a difference for you in being this individual contributor who's also taking responsibility for your experience of work and the quality of life at work?
I think that communication is a big one, and it could be as simple as you asking your leader how they're doing, what they need help with. I think it's also the leader taking that time to build rapport with their investment, right? You're an employee, your culture is going to be what you and your boss make it. And that can be great. It could be fulfilling when I have a good relationship with my leader and I have good communication and there's trust and you have to spend time working on that. Then I was able to kind of bloom in my career. Now I was, okay, I can create my environment. I can start posting on LinkedIn. I can work with the companies that I'm passionate about. I can make sure that I'm, focusing on diversity and inclusion and making sure that women, minorities, and all business have a seat at the table. So when I was supported and in an environment now where I'm able to thrive, it's the same team. It's just we did different things to build the trust, build the communication, and now I'm empowered. And I realized that I wasn't a bad person. My manager wasn't a bad person. We just had a little resentment towards one another because we weren't communicating.
Yeah. And it also sounds like you really did take the ownership for your experience and you took risks. You had courage to have those conversations. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
Purest sense of personal responsibility. You took personal responsibility for the quality of your experience at work. And then I suppose if he wasn't responsive and if he was pacifying you or saying, oh, Amadea, yeah, I thank you for sharing, but we're not doing any of that, that you probably wouldn't have stayed.
That's correct. I was already kind of evaluating my other options. I had been, tapped by other companies, by other leaders within the company. I had been kicking around my own business and but it made me so happy to have, I think leaders want and crave the tools. Typically a leader gets promoted because they're really good at what they do, but then how did they get there? How's their process? Is it something they can duplicate? Right. So,
and not everybody's cut out to manage people. Some people are better at being visionaries. Some people are better at being individual contributors. And some people are actually really talented at cultivating and leading other people. And I think a lot of the organizations get confused about that. They reward people by giving them more people, but not everybody's cut out. And even, we've had people, because our process is we assess the leader in 79 dimensions of leadership and emotional intelligence. And then often, all the time, we interview them about, why do you want to get better? And sometimes people will say, to be honest, I don't want to manage people. The only reason I said yes is because it meant more money. And then we tell them, then you should have an enrollment conversation with your company that there's other better jobs for you. And you shouldn't be managing people if you don't want to.
And I think the role of a leader is very challenging if you don't have the map. And many times, companies are working on, here are our goals, here's what we need to tell our employees, but we're not having a conversation about, hey, let's take some time to focus on the leader. Let's work on who you are as a leader. What's your leadership style? Are you a servant leader? Are you kind of totalitarian? You're the one that says this job might not be for you, kind of get out if you're not going to get on the roller coaster ride. those aren't the things that people, that doesn't help. That's a toxic, you wanted to know toxic leader behaviors, right? Telling people that they may not be the one for the job. I feel like it's kind of like you could give people hope, you could give them coaching, you could give them the tools, and I bet you they would be better for the job.
Yeah, it does depend on, like, there are some jobs like, banking, sales, or finance,
Yeah.
or real estate, or recruiting. And, recruiting, gosh, that was my industry. 1 out of 100 people succeeded. We always told people, you probably don't want this. If you don't like getting hit in the head with a hammer, you probably won't want this job. But I think that there's a happy world of integration. Here's all the reasons you might want this job. Here's the reasons you might not want this job. And here's what it takes to succeed. But with leadership, I do think there are some people who are cut for that.
Yes.
And want it really badly. And there are other people who take the job because they think it's a way to make more money.
Yes.
And their heart's not in it. And then it's hard for them and everybody that they work with. But there's something that you said, there's many companies go with, here's everything you need to do. Here's our vision. Here's where we're going. This is how to execute on the strategy, which is the doing. It's all about the doing, but there's another piece, and that's the being. And in Keen Alignment, what our leadership model, we follow the coactive leadership model. It's where I got my coaching training at, I think it's called the Coactive Leadership Institute. It used to be called the Coactive Training Institute, or Coaches Training Institute. And it's all about the integration of the doing and the being, the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere, the how do we get our strategy accomplished, but who are we being when we get our strategy accomplished? And, if you're like, what does she mean doing and being? The being is how we inspire people. The doing is the Monday morning meeting that we do it at. The being is who we be in a conversation for accountability, and that building trust and rapport. And the doing is having the one-on-one, and what do I say, and what's the right thing to say. And so with every leadership activity, there's a way of being. So for example, if you were to do a performance review and somebody isn't going to get a good review, or you're going to talk about some critical feedback and you're in a bad mood, we say, don't give it, just reschedule. Because if you're frustrated and agitated, I don't care what comes out of your mouth, that person's going to pick up on frustrated and agitated. So, you're going to be done with school.
Right.
What's been your biggest personal learning? I'm going to ask you 3 questions to close. Your biggest personal learning. She's like, I'm getting ready. Your biggest personal learning. What's next for you on your journey? And then I'll save the last one. So what's been your biggest personal learning in going back to school for this master's in leadership from Purdue?
Well, first of all, I think that when you are in a high pressure role, like sales in Silicon Valley in the financial industry, and you have a high pressure role like a lot of us do everywhere, better resources. Resources are more than just money. Resources are transparency. Resources are communication. Resources are flexibility. Resources are information. So
I'm hearing support systems.
Yes, high demand, high support.
Yes, that's really interesting that you say that. I talk about that in the book too. When you have high challenge, which, basically Silicon Valley, it's a big high challenge. You have to give support. And what Amadea is talking about is training, support systems, better communication, things that maybe people take for granted, but we can't take it for granted. We need to provide it.
Those are the building blocks of culture. Pay equity. If somebody's outperforming and they're not getting the same basic pay as their counterpart, it's not something that's hidden anymore.
Right.
And it could really erode, the culture. So
and trust
and trust
and inclusion and
everything.
Yeah.
And that's how you lose people. So
yeah,
if, the old way, the group think, the way that people always kind of do it and have done it, like as leaders and as employees, we need to challenge each other. And you don't want to lose your great employees, the good talent. It's too hard to find that knowledge that they've gained over the years. They're valuable. They're inspiring your team. You're inspiring one another. So that was a big learning for me. I just see that as, we have more resources than we think.
Yeah. Well, and you're talking about, we have our own internal resources and we can ask for what we want.
Right.
And we can communicate what's next for you in education or career. What do you see as your path? And I understand you're currently employed, but you're not saying you're leaving, but what is next for you? Education or career?
Yeah,
Or both?
that's a great question. I've been thinking about it a lot as, I'm going to be graduating in June. And for me, I think one of my professors kind of said towards the end of the capstone class, like, you guys are graduating as scientists. You've spent 2 years researching society, organizations, what helps motivate people. You've got a lot of keys. I've designed programs for coaching and mentoring. I've designed programs for leadership, where managers have those things. They learn the communication, they learn their own, leadership skills. They put more effort into feeding the heart, right? Rewards, team building. That's gone away, I think, a lot because of the virtual environment. But for me,
and everybody's in survival mode. They don't think the people side is as important as it is. And it is. It's super important.
And you will read case after case after case. The high performers that aren't, keeping up with the culture, they're going to get left behind. And the answer is impacting culture. It's that side that's missing. So for me, I just want to find a way to share it. Uniquely, I love finance. I love working with business owners. I'm so fortunate to work in the Bay Area, and everyone I talk to, an opportunity comes up. People are just light on fire when you talk about, how you want to be treated on the job, how you want to treat yourself. What are the tools you can do to empower yourself? And what are the conversations that you can have with your boss and feel safe and comfortable?
Have you thought about going to get a certification in coaching?
I have actually decided I was going to start my own corporation and look into consulting. You had some really great, one of the things I loved about meeting you is that you were so inspiring. And I love, when other women can lift up other women, and you were like, hey, you should do a vlog or a blog, and I'm sharing by word of mouth. And one of the great parts about my job is I meet leaders in the community and business owners all the time. And so I think that what's nice about having a culture that you love at work, which I can say now, is that you can do both. You can have multiple streams of income.
Yep,
you can talk about leadership on LinkedIn. You can talk about it at every event that you go to.
Yes, you can.
As soon as you say, where do you work? How do you like working there? I mean, people always have a story.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's great, and I love learning from that. And then sometimes there's challenges, and people have the right gist. They just don't have confidence in themselves because they don't know what they don't know. But what's wonderful about studying leadership is that I know there's good stuff, and I want to share it. I want to help people.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, best of success to you.
Thank
and
you.
If you decide to get your coaching certification, go over to CTI.
Okay.
I know your company, and they pay for people. I've met many, many people from that company that they sponsored them to get their coaching certification.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Amadea. Bye, everybody, and work liberated.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Work Liberated. May these nuggets of wisdom from the most inspiring human potential catalysts today guide you in becoming someone who can work exceptionally with others and accomplish goals inside the collective. Continue your journey as a fulfilled and self-actualized person by listening to more episodes at www.workliberated.org. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a positive rating, and share with your friends. That's all for now. See you on the next one.